What is up, guys? Rick Cactus here, and today I wanted to talk about the brand new Last Wish raid and essentially give my review on this piece of content. Knowing how to beat it is all well and good, but how actually is it to play? How fun is it? How engaging is it? How good are the rewards? That's the type of stuff I'm going to talk about today in this video, and I'm also going to address the main criticism being leveraged by the community on this raid, and that's the fact that it's just too hard, too difficult, and a lot of players just won't be able to actually participate in this content. Now, we are just over 40 seconds in, and I haven't given my opinion at all whether or not I do believe Last Wish is too hard. But I suspect a couple of dislikes and some fully capitalized comments already because this is such a hot button issue within the community. But obviously, if I'm doing a review on the piece of content, I need to address the main criticism of that content. So, let's start at the very beginning here in terms of how does the Last Wish look and feel to play? Like, does it all make sense? Is it good looking in terms of the areas you go? And honestly, yes, Bungie's done a great job on all of these raids and how they look and how they feel. Do they feel like a true raid? Like you're diving into the Dreaming City, like you're getting closer and closer to the heart of the Dreaming City to take out this big boss? And for the most part, Last Wish does feel like this. You're fighting your way, again, more inside the Dreaming City, where the last encounters kind of take place right in the center of things. You go from the outdoor arenas to the indoor arenas, as you move through the Dreaming City. So this is all generally good. However, as a whole package, as a cohesive experience, I'm not sure it does as good of a job as Leviathan. Now, I'm not saying Leviathan is a better raid or anything, but what I am saying is that when you're in Leviathan, it's very focused. You're on this massive Cabal ship, you're going to all these different places before eventually, after completing these different challenges for Callus, you're funneled to the very center of this arena for this massive boss fight. Again, it's a very cohesive experience. You know exactly why you're there. Last Wish, it does a good job, but I don't feel like it's as cohesive. But in terms of how it looks and the skyboxes, I would say it's even better than Leviathan in that area. Now that's all well and good, but how is this raid actually to play? Like, is it a fun and enjoyable experience? Well, that's a very interesting question, because that's definitely a matter of opinion. For the most part, I feel like this raid was a good raid experience, and harkens back to several of the Destiny raids that were more focused on boss battles. It's kind of interesting. Bungie clearly was criticized on the first few raids that they didn't have enough boss fights. I mean, with Leviathan, the main raid, you really don't have any boss fights. Maybe the War Beasts somewhat count as a boss fight, but then you really just have the big Callus fight, and that's it. And again, Bungie was criticized for that, with people wanting a little bit more. And essentially, they took that criticism and applied it 100%, because almost every encounter in this new raid is a boss fight. There's 4 distinct boss fights, and 2 other encounters that are not boss fight encounters, but 4 out of 6 encounters really are pure boss fights. And again, that's them applying this criticism, but did they go too far? Is it like too much focus on, alright, DPS the boss, DPS the boss? That's something you're going to hear so many times in this raid, whereas something like Wrath of the Machine, I did feel like got a good mix between boss fights and really interesting encounters. Whereas something like the Taken King, I felt went a little bit too all in on boss fights. It was all like boss fight after boss fight after boss fight, and you missed those more interesting and engaging encounters. Some good examples of that are the Gorgon's Maze from the Vault of Glass, like just avoiding being detected by those Gorgons. Like, that's such a different experience compared to anything else in the entire game, that it really feels like a unique raid encounter, a unique raid experience. Another great example is Wrath of the Machine, when you're on that big vehicle, you're trying to repair it and it's moving forward and stuff. That's another really interesting encounter. And just going after boss fight after boss fight after boss fight, I'm not sure is the best approach. So I feel like one less boss fight in favor of one additional, like, interesting, different encounter, that's what I would have preferred. But since we're talking about how this raid plays, let's again dive into that biggest criticism Is it too hard? Well, undoubtedly, this was, arguably the most challenging raid Bungie has ever put out. Only 2 teams were able to complete it within that 24-hour window. We were the world's first on console, and we were a whole day later. We were 13th overall. And this seems to be somewhat of another kind of knee-jerk reaction to the criticism Bungie received over Leviathan, right? We saw no boss fights. Hey, we want boss fights. Okay, here's a bunch of boss fights. With Leviathan, and, well, not necessarily Leviathan, but Destiny 2 in general when it launched, hey, everything's too easy. Okay, here's really, really hard, right? And when you criticize these aspects of the game, people often tend to really focus on one side or the other in terms of the extremes. Like when we're talking about exotic drops, for example, right now exotics are dropping very rarely, and that's what the community and myself was asking for, because when D2 launched, they were handing out exotics like candy. However, if you see someone argue, hey, it might be a little bit too difficult to get exotics, and this is again just an example, not my opinion, people will pile on that person and say, how dare you, this is what we were asking for, don't criticize it. But again, it's a spectrum. They can be less rare than they are now and drop a little bit more commonly, but not drop as commonly as the launch of Destiny 2. Why does everything have to be extremely easy? You get an exotic for blinking, or really, really difficult to get an exotic. I feel like there's, again, a middle ground or more towards one side or the other. It doesn't have to be hot or cold. And the reason I bring that up is because I see that a lot when talking about the difficulty of this raid. Either people saying, no, it should be incredibly difficult. The fact that only 2 teams beat it in the first 24 hours is a good thing. This is the end game. This is what we were all wanting for. And then people saying like, no, it should be way easier. I'm 520 light and I can't do the raid. What the heck is this? There's definitely a middle ground between those 2 arguments that I feel like is a little bit more reasonable than the place we're at right now. Because I did say before this raid launched, I said, I really hope that they don't do the same thing they did with Spire of Stars, and that is artificially inflate its difficulty by making the light level incredibly hard to get to. Like, Spire of Stars wasn't that insane of a raid layer. The only reason it was really difficult and it took people a long time to complete was because you got one-shot by everything. Because even the players who leveled every day and played like 15 hours a day weren't able to reach, an appropriate light level in order to really tackle that challenge fairly. And it is my personal opinion that raids in Destiny are cool and are difficult because of the mechanics, not because you're one-shot by everything. And Last Wish is already an incredibly mechanics-focused raid. If it would have launched at 500, it still would have taken people a while to defeat it. Honestly, probably like several hours, 5, 6, 7 hours to defeat it. Definitely not 19, but still, the mechanics are what makes this raid cool, engaging, and difficult. You don't need to also pile on light level. Light level should absolutely be a requirement because that's the entire thing that makes this raid an endgame activity. If this raid came out at 500, what's the point of having it come out like later on? Might as well just launch it as soon as the DLC launches, because people are going to be reaching that requirement, that light level, so quickly. But again, in my opinion, I feel like the light level going as high as it did in Last Wish was unnecessary. I would have had it just 10 light levels below. Instead of fighting 590 enemies at the end encounter, you're fighting 580. Feel like that would have been much more reasonable and allowed a lot more people to actually go in and challenge this raid, because something that I don't think a lot of people are talking about involving this raid is there is, even though this raid is cool and it did get a lot of attention, there's a lot less excitement about this raid. Right? And I know just me saying that I felt like it should have been a little bit lower light level, a lot of the hardcores are going to pile on me and say, how dare you, this is supposed to be the end game. But again, something I noticed is that just people were not really excited about this raid. When Leviathan came out, it was a big event. All of the community, I really do mean like almost all of the Destiny community was lining up and going in that raid. Right? So when you put raid guides out, they exploded because people were in the raid trying to do it. With this raid, what I saw the vast majority of the time was people look at the light level requirements, look at the encounters, and look at the light level of the enemies in those encounters and just went, nope, screw that. They just went, I'm not doing that, and they just didn't even bother. A lot of people still haven't even bothered. And I feel like that is a problem. Having a difficult raid is good. Having a high light level raid is good. Having an exclusive and elusive raid that only a few people are going to beat within the first week, that's also good. But having a raid that's such high of a light level off the bat, the majority of people, even if they've been playing a ton, just look at it and go, nope, like that is not so good. But here's the thing, that power level disparity is the only problem with difficulty I have. Again, this is a very mechanically intensive raid, and yet I wouldn't change a single mechanic. Yes, it's going to be a struggle to beat Riven, but if you master those mechanics, it actually isn't so bad. It's just that incredibly inflated power level off the start to introduce that artificial difficulty in which I really have a problem with. As people level up and finally get to 550 and beyond, I feel like, more and more people will be able to get through this raid. But if you do manage to struggle through this intense raid, what do you get from it? And now we have to talk about the rewards. And frankly, the rewards within the Last Wish raid are somewhat disappointing. I'm not gonna lie. Now, that's not to say that they're terrible. They're actually, I would say good, but not as good as other raids we've seen, and yet the disappointment. When you beat an encounter for Last Wish, you're gonna get one single drop. One drop, right? And it's gonna be incredibly high light, so the first time going through there, you're gonna be very, very lucky. But then we kind of run into some problems. The fact that you only get one drop, well, if you get a duplicate, like if you get a chess piece the first time and a chess piece the second time, enjoy being screwed, right? That is incredibly frustrating. On my second run through, I got 2 boots and 2 helmets for raid drops. And that just lowers the amount of light you would go up by an astronomically disappointing amount. So I feel like, okay, Bungie, if you're going to give us one drop, throw us a bone, make sure that you get drops that are not identical to drops you got in the last encounter. You know what I'm saying? Definitely drop protection should have been introduced in this raid. Like, it's a raid. It's a really hard piece of content. People actually overcome these challenges and still get screwed by RNG. Like, please, you don't have to have that much RNG. Speaking of RNG, the weapons themselves are completely RNG oriented. If you want a good raid auto rifle, you're gonna have to luck out. Now, with that, there has been these cool, I would refer to them as exotic rolls because they have the exact same layout as exotic weapons, where they have one row of perks along the top and you cannot change or alter these perks. Like, they're set in stone. You cannot change the barrels, you cannot change the magazines, anything like that. You got one row of perks. And these are kind of like Bungie's opinion on the god rolls. So if you get and this is more common in the raid, but if you get a weapon, you have a chance for it to come Masterwork 10 in a certain property, and then that will indicate that it is one of these like special exotic god rolls. That's cool because those kind of give us what we would expect from raid weapons, where these special unique rolls. However, you can get actually these kind of exotic style rolls outside the raid. You can get them from Dreaming City loot, for example, so that makes them a little bit less special. Some of these weapons, like the auto rifle, do get pretty unique perks. Like, it has a perk, a 4th times the charm, which is basically triple tap, but you get 2 rounds back. Very, very good perk. Very, very rare. Now, it does spawn outside the raid. Apparently, one of the Nightfall exclusive snipers can get it, stuff like that, but it's still a very, very rare perk. That feels like a raid drop. When you get an RNG raid drop that's just trash roll, that doesn't really feel like a raid drop. I still maintain that the best raid loot of all time was in the Wrath of the Machine. Even better than Vault of Glass. I know that's a bold statement, but hear me out. Wrath of the Machine felt the most like raid drops because you would get stuff within Wrath that you couldn't get anywhere else. The Wrath loot was designed to work off unique perks that weren't spawning in any other legendary weapon. So, for example, the Genesis Chain auto rifle, which became one of the most used auto rifles in the game, it had Focus Fire. Now, that's a common perk that you can get on normal legendaries, where if you aim down sights, the fire rate slows and the damage increases. But then it came with Focus Firefly, which you could get literally nowhere else, and that made it so that when you killed an enemy with a precision shot, they would explode. It made the Genesis Chain very, very good. And pretty much all of the Wrath of the Machine loot had the same thing going on. It had a perk and then another unique perk that you couldn't get anywhere else that would play off that initial perk that would give it these unique abilities. And a lot of the Wrath loot ended up being very, very good in PvE and in PvP sometimes. But most importantly, it just, again, felt very unique. When you get a raid hand cannon, when you get the raid hand cannon from Last Wish and you get a trash roll, it doesn't feel unique. It feels like the same time you get every other hand cannon in the game ever. You're just getting a random legendary drop with random rolls. Now, with all of that being said, I don't really hate those random raid rolls because of those exotic style rolls we talked about earlier. It feels like another mechanism to introduce replayability into this raid is that you're going through the raid and trying to get those perfect rolls. So it's a weird system. I'm not sure, even with those perfect exotic rolls, I wish those perfect exotic rolls were even more unique. Again, similar to the Wrath weapons, but still, it's not a terrible system. It's a different system, and it is going to be slightly disappointing when you do finally get a raid weapon and it's a trash roll. Now, something again I'm slightly disappointed by is the armor rolls. Now, the armor rolls can spawn, and they spawn more frequently with the enhanced perk. This is some very rare perks that basically, the best example is that you can get rocket launcher loader. You just reload rocket launchers faster. But on raid armor and some other armor, I believe it can also drop from the Dreaming City loot, but you can get enhanced rocket launcher loader. So it just reloads your rocket launcher even faster than the normal perks. So when you're going through the raid, you're trying to look at your rolls for these enhanced perks. Like I got enhanced hand cannon targeting, where you get better aim down sight speed and aim assistance and all of that stuff. So that's going to be some very useful perks, like getting the enhanced version of those perks for PvP and even PvE. Like that's something to go after. But again, they're random. And I wish we had some unique raid armor perks again, like we had, I hate to say it again, but with Wrath of the Machine. Every single piece of armor had special perks that went really well with the Wrath of the Machine raid. You had, some perks where if you're carrying a Scorch Cannon, you were harder to kill. Well, that came up quite a bit in the raid, so you'd want to get a complete set, so you were more survivable when you were redoing that raid. That would actually work kind of perfectly with this new system of randomization, is getting armor pieces that have intrinsic perks that make your raid runs easier. Because if Bungie is saying that you have to farm this raid to get those, special god rolls and stuff, well, let's get some perks that actually help farm the raid, you know what I'm saying? And I feel like armor was a little bit more of a miss than the weapons. And so, those are my feelings on the Last Wish raid. I feel like as a piece of content, it's still very, very good. I think Bungie's raids, Destiny's raids are up there in the upper echelon of amazing gaming content, right? Like, what other game has raids like this, like The Last Wish, that require this level of communication and knowledge and just playing smart and all of this stuff? It's such a unique experience, and I love Destiny's raids. With that being said, if we're going to compare all the raids ever made in Destiny 1 and Destiny 2, I feel like Last Wish is not the best one. I feel like there's lessons that Bungie can learn and take from previous raids, mainly Wrath. I feel like Wrath is such a high point in terms of getting things right that hopefully going forward with the annual pass raid layers, Bungie can apply these changes and these lessons. Guys, that's it for the video. Hope you enjoyed and found this informative. If you did, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Destiny content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. And if you guys want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickCacus. That's linked in the description down below, as is my Twitch channel, which you can also follow. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.